Our first speaker tonight, Michael Sahadi, The Wisdom of Will, the Last American Cowboy. All quotes tonight are those of Will Rogers. No copyright infringement intended. The Wisdom of Will, the Last American Cowboy, Michael Sahadi.
Ladies and gentlemen, our country's in trouble. We have a plague, an epidemic that is facing us, one that has not faced us ever in our history. It is pulling apart the fabric of ourselves as Americans. We are living in a state of fear. What are we so afraid of? We're afraid to speak. We're afraid to talk. We're afraid to express to other people how we feel about things. We have a term for this. This is known as political correctness. Now, through the ages, history has had a way to combat and mitigate political correctness, and that's through the form of satire, or political satire. Mr. Contest Master, fellow contestants, guests, and of course, fellow Toastmasters. The greatest political satirist our country has ever known is none other than Will Rogers. For those of you who don't know Will, or know of him, he lived in a very tumultuous time, a time of great uncertainty, and he used his acting, he was an actor, he used his acting and his voice on the radio to talk to the American people and assuage some of their fears. Now, the time that Will lived in was around the Great Depression, and that's the biggest time period that he's well known for. Now, Will would get on the radio, along with some more prominent people such as President Hoover at the time, and he would talk to the American people, and he would use satire. Will had a funny way of putting things, I'll tell you. He said some things that today are just as relevant as they were back then. You know, all that can be said about the U.S. Senate is that they open with a prayer, and they end with an investigation. Our Constitution protects three things nowadays: aliens, drunks, and U.S. senators. Death and taxes, they're pretty similar. Except when Congress meets, death doesn't get any worse. See, these are all lessons that Will conveyed to us that really are still relevant today. And he said them in a way that doesn't offend anybody. And that's the biggest fear with political correctness, is offending somebody who doesn't agree with the statement that you're making. What a silly and total nonsense thing to believe, that you're offending someone who already disagrees with you. But Will used satire to communicate things like that, the troubles of the government that he saw. You know, there's a big change sweeping our country, and that is, we take our comedians very seriously now, and our politicians are a joke. Will said that back in the 30s, and it's still true today. Our country is in a state of disaster. But why use satire? Well, because it helps to express things that we feel. It does it in a way that people on both sides of the political aisle, people on both ends of the political spectrum, they can relate to. And Will would do this. He'd get on weekly radio addresses, and he would talk to the country. Will was a cowboy, born in what is now Oklahoma. He was an actor. On his shows, he'd talk, very much like he did on the radio, and he was a trick roper. The reason we have trick roping today, as we know it, is because of Will Rogers. He had something very similar to this, which is a lariat, or in Spanish, a lasso. He would get on and he would do different tricks and entertain people, while at the same time talking to them, telling them what the problems we face are. See, we as Americans are dealing with this epidemic now. That we send people to Washington to protest the fact that we're losing our right to free speech. Yet, it's not Washington that's entirely at fault. You see, we're partially at fault because we adhere to political correctness. Political correctness does nothing more than sequester our voice. We limit what we can say to other people because of fear that will offend them. So what you have is people no longer communicating in an effective manner to resolve problems. In fact, all we do is blame one another for issues that very easily be resolved if we just sat down at the table and talked to one another and expressed to each other what our views are and how we feel about certain things. That's really the way to fix this thing. There's a lot of issues facing the country nowadays. The economy's not very good, and there's a lot of social change. And if we're not careful, we're going to get all knotted up. We've got to learn to uncoil ourselves. We do that through communication. We as Toastmasters are the torchbearers of communication. We get up here and we talk to one another, and we convey different views. Some controversial, some not. But we do it in a way that's respectful to one another. We talk about different things, and we can resolve our issues in communication. Now, that doesn't mean you can get up and just say whatever you want about anything. You have to be somewhat respectful about your views and other people's views. And Will had a story about this. I want something like this. There's a mountain lion on a trail one day, and he comes across a big bull. For those of you who don't know what a bull is, a bull's a really big animal with horns, kind of like a big cat. Well, this mountain lion, see, he finds this big bull, he's hungry. Being a mountain lion, he overpowers the bull, consumes the whole thing, eats every bit of it. And he's done it. His ribs hurt. His stomach feels like it's going to explode. And he lays down in the warm grass and he starts wailing out in pain and roaring and making a big commotion like. Soon enough, after making all this commotion, a hunter comes along. Bang! Kills the mountain lion right then and there. What's the moral of that story? The moral of the story is this. You're full of bull. Keep your mouth shut. There's also a moral to that moral, and that is if you have something to say, you should say it. You see, we as Americans all have something to say. We have that right to free speech, and we should exercise it. We shouldn't restrict it, but we should do it in a respectful way. We need to learn that the best way to solve a problem is for us to talk, to work together, to resolve it, to really kind of throw a rope around the issue, circle it, so to speak. You see, we are part of the problem. We can be part of the solution. We can just tie up these loose ends and fix it. Now, I'm sorry if you're expecting a rope trick tonight. I don't know any rope tricks, but that's entirely the point of my speech, is that there's no tricks to solving problems, but the best way to do it is through communication, a little bit of practice, learning different tricks, how to do this. You see, we all can't be heroes. Because somebody's got to be sitting on the curb, applauding the heroes as they go by. We can all be part of the solution if we work together. Mr. Congress Spencer.
We have 1 minute for the judges.